the Honorable Deputy Speaker, MP for Uasin Gishu County, and my former teacher.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. That's my claim to fame, that I taught some clever people, including yourself. Yes, he was one of the good students. So, Honorable Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to be able to lend my voice to this very, very important bill, the Statutory Instruments Amendment Bill of 2023. Like has earlier been said by Honorable Chepkonga, Chairperson for the Delegated Legislation Committee, is that I had a similar bill, but we have merged it so that we can be able to prosecute one bill. Honorable Speaker, as I speak here, I speak not only as someone who was previously chairperson for the 12th Parliament Committee on Delegated Legislation, but also as a total public servant, having served in all three arms of government. Honorable Speaker, my experience has been, there's been many challenges relating to the Statutory Instruments Act. The reason has been that it had had loopholes that has lent itself to abuse by various members of the executive, that they could actually pass legislation through the back door. Previously, the law allowed a situation where a cabinet secretary or a statutory institution could publish regulations in the Kenya Gazette, submit them to the clerk of the National Assembly within 7 days. And while it was pending in the Committee of Delegated Legislation for 28 days, the regulations would take effect and Kenyans would start having to abide by them. If they were to pay any penalties, they would start paying them. In the meantime, the committee would be considering that particular regulation. And usually, by the time that the regulation would be annulled in the committee and by the House, it would have already caused irreparable harm and damage to Kenyans. At that time, the mischief was that these particular institutions and ministries would actually bring it on such a time, because at that time we were counting 28 calendar days. We then amended this instrument, this act, to say that it's 28 sitting days, so that it could protect us from mischief at the time when we were on recess. Because we found that the ministries were publishing the regulations while we were on recess. And by the time we came back, we had 3 days left, and the law that time permitted that they take effect if we don't act. So by omission, they would actually end up, ministers would become more powerful than Parliament. Even after we made that change, they discovered, and I can give you examples of the ones that happened. I still remember the regulations banning shisha were passed when we were on Christmas recess. And by the time we came back in January, they had taken effect. But at that time, they were not being done for the good of getting rid of a harmful product in the market. It was going to Christmas, and they wanted to boost the sales of cigarette companies and certain alcohol companies. So they were serving private interests, not public interest. Another example I can give you that was done, again, to serve private people was the ban of the one-use plastic in our supermarkets. Many people did not notice it, but the mischief was they would do it when we were on recess. They did it when we were on recess. And they published that I remember it was the Ministry of Environment at that time. And they published the banning of those particular plastics, which was a good thing on the face of it. But the story behind the story was they already had their own friends who bought the alternative bags and had them waiting at the port. That's why you should ask yourself as Kenyans, how is it that plastic was banned today and tomorrow we went to the supermarket and there was a new type of paper bag and carrier bag? Because it was a business. So in fact, I'm asking Honorable Chepkonga, as the sitting chairperson of the delegated committee, to completely continue interrogating this particular Statutory Instruments Act and don't get tired of bringing amendment after amendment to this House as and when you discover a new mischief and a new loophole. Another example I can give you is by the mischievous chairperson of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, Ms. Lynn Mengich. She waited again when members of parliament had already gone to recess for elections. Then she publishes something in the Kenya Gazette when we had no power to come back to the House to interrogate what she had done. That must stop. Let us send a very clear message to the ministers and state corporations that we are watching, and Parliament will not allow this to happen. I know another existing mischief that was there is that usually, I know that I used to be called the committee of annulment, because the only time we came to the House is when the law required us only to come to the House when we were annulling a regulation. But actually, we approved 70% of the regulations. But 30% that were for annulment had to come to the House. But now I'm glad that under this amendment, the committee will have to every 3 months, quarterly, or every 3 months, bring a list and report to the House those particular pieces of regulation that they have approved, so that the entire House, which is the one that has the substantive legislative making power and mandate under the Constitution, can be kept abreast of the goings-on those issues. Another issue was the issue, lastly, the issue of what was defined as public participation. I know we brought in amendments and we began to define what is public participation. Is it calling a few of your friends in a room and like-minded people, and then you resign for us and tell the committee, oh, we have undertaken public participation? We said public participation must be relevant stakeholders. Not everybody in the world, but at least relevant stakeholders. And now we saw the mischief that went on recently with the regulations around the education sector, where publications were being made from the ministry. Now we must also put it in there, or it's not even there, it's common sense, that if the minister is publishing regulations that touch on the education sector, then the committee on education in Parliament is a relevant stakeholder, and they must be invited as part of public participation. After all, they are the ones who vote money to that particular entity. And lastly, sorry, I forgot one more point. I know that there had been a suggestion, but Honorable Chepkonga has told me that he's willing to amend it, where there was the amendment saying that where a law has since been nullified, it should be published in the newspapers to notify members of the public. But we know that the official communication and publication for government is the Kenya Gazette, because this can also be a money-making thing for the rogue newspapers that we already have. So, and we'll also be spending a lot of unavailable government resources. For that, I beg to support with those few interventions. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I hope Honorable Owen Bayer now knows you can only be good if you learn from the best.